Good morning, everyone. We're going to kick off with the event shortly, but I'm just going to run through some housekeeping just while we're waiting for a few others to join. Today's event will be being recorded so that others can watch the event later and can access it through the websites. Actually, it doesn't mean much for you guys because we won't be able to look at your lovely faces and the only questions will be through the Q&A. So actually, there's no privacy issue there at all. We will be having a Q&A session, which will follow the break at 11:20. And please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A as we move along, and we'll answer some along the way and some during the Q&A session. As I said, there will be a break at 11:15 for 5 minutes, all being well, unless we get very well behind on the schedule. And you should have seen the schedule. It was circulated when you registered for the event. I won't be running through that again, just in the interest of time, but the schedule's there, as is the biography of the speakers today. And continuing on that subject, I'm very humbled to be able to chair today's event. I'm Greg Parsons. I'm the co-founder of Southwest Food Hub, amongst other hats that I wear, and we really have brought together some of the game changers in the food sector, along with a very, very well qualified and diverse audience. So it's a real privilege for me to be involved today. And I think we should press on with the event now. We will have people joining the events, but in the interest of time and the busy schedule, we should press on. We've got a number of supporters that are involved in today's event, but also many outside of the event that couldn't be here today. We've had a great deal of support from the National Food Strategy, and I was lucky enough to catch up with Henry Dimbleby yesterday, and he would like to share a few comments and words around dynamic food procurement. So I'm going to hand over to Ellen to run VT.
I just want to ask you a few catalysts for change for the food sector. So we're fully behind the efforts and hope that what comes through the white paper is what's needed. Our event today is obviously based around trying to build a nationwide support for dynamic food procurement. So if it's okay, Henry, I just want to ask you a few questions that we can share with the audience today, really specifically concerning the National Food Strategy and how it's sort of highlighted dynamic food procurement within it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and thanks for all your kind of fantastic work trying to bring, whole part of this change is to try and get the right communities working together across the food system and speaking with one voice, and the work you're doing on that's been absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'll dive straight in because I'm conscious of time. So just diving into recommendation 13, you speak about the government spend on food as a potential tool for change. What do you mean by that?
If you look at the food that we eat today, about 50% of it is processed, highly processed. About 85% of that is not deemed healthy enough to feed to children. And then you have unprocessed food. And there are two, really, from a health point of view, and we'll come on to the environment, there are two transitions that need to happen. One is we need to get the bad stuff less bad for you, and that is where we recommended the sugar and salt tax. You need to make a direct intervention to change the commercial incentives of companies. We didn't believe that just measures that weren't actually cutting directly at that commercial incentive would work. But you also need to change our food culture. And there's this has been a 50-year change, and we need to shift that back. And there are two levers the government has at its disposal to do that. One of them is schools and the education it gives the schools and the food it serves in schools, but the other is procurement. The government buys over 5% of all of the calories eaten in the UK, and through schools, through hospitals, through prisons, through government buildings. But the way in which that's procured, as you'll know, Greg, is very often through large, big contracts with the big commercial wholesalers. And there's actually a real opportunity both to improve quality at a decent price by making it easier for people buying the food for those institutions to buy from local providers. And actually, I have a charity here in London called Chefs in Schools, and we set up an app for the schools where they could buy from local providers and from Brixham for seafood directly from the market. And what we saw was in those cases that you get a care and attention to the food that you buy. You get better local produce, but actually that the prices don't go up. And that's why that kind of procurement is so important. And that's why the efforts of the Southwest Food Hub, which we were very excited about actually when we first went to see it, are so important. If you can prove that model works and we can roll that out nationally, I think you could completely change the way a 20th of our food is procured. And that will also not only make the food better in those institutions, but when you change supply chains on that scale, other people will piggyback on that. So other people will come in and say, I want a bit of that. And you look at all sorts of examples of that. So for example, free range eggs in this country, when McDonald's started doing free range eggs, it completely changed the supply and demand of free range eggs here. If you look at a stupid example, quinoa, at Leon, we bought a lot of quinoa, and we're the first people, I think, to do British quinoa at scale. It meant that it was on the lorries of British quinoa, and so lots of other people buy it. So I think that 5% is a huge amount of purchasing spend. And if we could transform that, it could have a very profound effect on the food culture in this country.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And of course, and that doesn't prohibit the big wholesalers and the big caterers from being involved in that. It's just about trying to open up the sectors a bit wider for more regional and shorter supply chains to supplement that and provide more choice, right? And enable the buyers to make more choice.
It's a problem for them as well. So if you look at the way in which the big companies are thinking about their supply chains, they've got this tension. For them, the efficiency of doing it, just like buying in bulk with a smaller range, pushes them away from what they want to be doing, which is buying locally, because that's actually what their customers want. And so if you can solve that problem, you're not just solving it for the consumer, for the individual, you're actually solving it for the system itself. And that's why kind of this IT-based platform approach is so exciting to me.
Brilliant. Well, you've actually answered the second question. I was going to ask you about why dynamic food procurement was sort of name checked in there, but I think you've actually answered that very well within that as well. But so the National Food Strategy call. Sorry.
Just to give an example of that, if you look at what has happened in terms of austerity, a lot of the cuts have come in what is seen as non-essential. So there have been large cuts in the buying departments of institutions across the country. And what is exciting about a dynamic hub, having seen it in action, is how easy it is. It just takes that pain away for the buyer. So you can get the same impact of having someone really thinking about it for a fraction of the cost. It becomes, it's like, why wouldn't I buy my vegetables from there, my milk from there, my meat from there? Because it's just as easy as buying it from the stuff that isn't local.
That's great. Yeah, no, absolutely. It aggregates supply as well, so it enables suppliers to work together to reach the volumes required. So the National Food Strategy calls for $3 million in funding to support and enable the expansion and the open up public sector procurement. In terms of, from our perspective, how do we go about unlocking that funding, I suppose?
Well, I think that the key is, obviously, I think, as you know, the department of which I'm a lead non-exec is strongly supportive. For me, it's about the benefit of it, not just the benefit of what you're doing, but the potential to make it national is so huge. And I don't hear anyone argue against it. But in the time of tightened purse strings, what you need to do is you need to make sure all of the people who are making the decision hear loudly and clearly that this is an idea, the economics of which is proven, that people want, and just not to let it be a kind of unfortunate casualty of what happened during COVID. So I think noise and activity at the decision makers, at in DEFRA, in Treasury, but also, most importantly, I think getting the people who are going to use it to tell that story. There's one thing for campaigners to tell a story. If you can get hospitals and schools and offices to tell the story too, that's even more powerful.
Brilliant. Well, you're firing up our crowd here today. I'm saying today, tomorrow, but today, and this, I mean, because it's the audience full of those people, and that's what we're trying to say to people is we'll help people to understand more, and then we all need to play our part in bringing it to life. So, slightly more straightforward question for you now, Henry. Really, is what happens next with the National Food Strategy?
So the white paper is going to be, I think, towards the end of the third quarter of next year. But there are actually, so what I was trying to do was two things. One was to create a narrative, a new narrative, and change some of the false assumptions people have about how the food system works. And that's the idea of the junk food cycle, the invisibility of nature. The second part was specific. How do you get specific policies, 14 specific policies embedded? I'm quite pleased actually about how the first bit is going. A lot of those concepts seem to be gripping, and they're also, it's being read in other countries, which was an intention as well. So I'm pleased with that. Now my effort is on the second thing, is on how do we get those policies embedded. And there are a number of, the way that policy works, you kind of get, people begin to understand the ideas, you get a kind of brimming up that certain things are good ideas. And then there are moments when those get crystallized into policy. And there are a few obvious moments. There's a leveling up white paper in the new year. That's going to be followed by the white paper in response to the food strategy, which is going to be followed by an inequality, a health inequalities white paper that DHSC are working on.
Thank you. And obviously, just final question really is we've got 300 interested parties registered for today, tomorrow's event, whichever it is. I'm sure all of them see the benefits of the National Food Strategy. So what can they do? What can we do to further support the National Food Strategy and make sure that as much of it as possible comes to life?
I think there are two things that you can do. The first is that every plate of food that was ever served to someone that was delicious and nutritious was served because someone at a local level took care to source those ingredients to make that food. And we shouldn't be waiting for government to make change at a local level, whether that is even at the level of going and asking to sit and eat food with your child at their school to see, to encourage them to improve, or as you're doing and others are doing, getting involved in bigger changes in the local food systems, local food chains. That is something we should always be getting on with without asking government. And then the second thing now is coordinating, finding out who is coordinating responses. There are those 3 white papers. You've got the leveling up white paper in the early new year. You've got the white paper for the food strategy, and then you've got the inequalities white paper, health inequalities. All of those have elements of the food system in. Find out the activities going campaigning on those in your area, write to the relevant Secretary of State, write to the relevant influencers, write to your MP, and be part of a kind of national campaign to say the food system needs to change and we need to change it now.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much again for taking time out of your busy schedule. And, I hope that our paths cross at some point. But thanks for the great work again. And rest assured that we'll be doing our bit to try and make sure that we can open up this public sector procurement and use it as a tool for change. So thank you very much.
Okay, great privilege to be talking to Henry Dimbleby there. I'd also like to just say well done to Ros, who's joined us from Perth, Western Australia, probably the furthest away attendee today. Thought you'd be watching the cricket, but anyway, you're very welcome here. And without further ado, I'm going to hand across to Chrissy Story. Chrissy was one of the founder members of the Dynamic Food Procurement National Advisory Board. Chrissy was also one of the pioneers that brought to life the Baines pilot that started all this going. So I'm very privileged to hand over, and she's going to talk to you about dynamic food procurement and give a brief introduction to the Dynamic Purchasing UK. Over to you, Chrissy. You'll need to unmute.
I started sharing, I'm sorry, before I actually unmuted myself, which doesn't actually help. Yes, thank you, Greg. As Greg mentioned, I am the current chair of the Dynamic Food Procurement National Advisory Board. We set up about 4 years ago to try and move this movement forward, and we're a mix of national policymakers, procurers and supplier representatives, kind of equal balance around that. Our stated aim at the moment is to divert more than 33% of UK public sector food and drink spend to fresh local produce from sustainable SMEs by 2023. When we set up in kind of 2017, 2018, 2023 seemed ambitious a while away, but so ambitious, but actually it's now becoming much, much closer to reality. I mean, it's only got kind of a year away in effect, but kind of 2 years really to the end of it. And it is kind of this whole kind of dynamic food movement is actually just coming to a culmination, we feel. And from the rest of this morning session, you will understand about how and why you can get involved. So don't go after any breaks, just stick around. My background is sustainable public sector procurement, and I was part of the procurement team in Bath, North East Somerset, who developed and implemented the procurement model, which is now known as Dynamic Food Procurement. For a while, it was known as the Baines model, but it's now known as DFP. So why dynamic food procurement? So the definition of dynamic is always active, changing, making progress. And I think that's kind of quite crucial as to where we're going. And this is actually precisely the opposite of usual food procurement. It tends to be static, really makes progress due to the traditional procurement routes of food and kind of the traditional kind of approach to procurement. Food or food service contracts usually involved one or a very limited number of suppliers who supply a fixed term contract with little or no appetite for innovation and improvement once that contract is let. Dynamic food procurement changes all of that. It uses smart technology to facilitate access to public sector markets for smaller scale, sustainable and local producers and suppliers, whilst maintaining a strong price competition throughout the duration of the contract. For producers and suppliers, particularly SMEs, it provides an easy access to market, results in shorter and more transparent supply chains. Unlike traditional food contracts, where suppliers are expected to supply product all year round, dynamic food procurement allows for producers growing maybe just kind of 1 or 2 crops to supply when they have product, but also allows them to be part of the public sector food chain, which we think is really, really crucial. They're some of the best suppliers around. End users have one point of access through an online. So I just started getting feedback on myself. End users have one point of access to an online portal, which due to the parameters specified by those end users, allows them to make really informed choices about their purchases, as well as setting higher quality and welfare requirements. The system is not static. DFP can be proactive in working with suppliers and producers, the logistic operators, and the end user clients to ensure that the systems work for all parties, not just for one particular end of it. I really believe it's a transformational procurement model. It addresses the requirement of spending public money for public good, something which we as public sector procurers are mandated to do, but not always know how to do that best in the right way. How it all started. Back in the midst of time in Bath and North East Somerset, we had a requirement to let a school food contract that was due to expire. That contract was a joint one with a neighbouring authority and was of 5 lots, including fresh fruit, veg, meat, dairy, ambient, and a couple of other categories. We as Baines Council had just launched our local strategy, our procurement strategy, and the local food strategy was just about to be launched. And both of those were recommending local suppliers for contracts to drive economic development and to support local businesses and also to get local product into our supply chain. The new contract was going to be let on the same basis as the current contract, i.e. 5 lots, and that seemed the expedient way forward. But we had a supplier engagement session on the back of the launch event of the local food strategy, and some of you actually in the room might actually have been at that. As there was going to be a number of local producers and suppliers at that event, it seemed the perfect opportunity to get the voice of the smallest local suppliers on board. We presented our proposal and we asked for feedback, and we got feedback. And the feedback we got was that the way in which we planned to proceed wouldn't actually help small producers at all. They would still be locked out from the start of a contract. Something had to be done really differently, to kind of sort of act on that feedback, but also to achieve our strategic aims. We couldn't kind of go against both strategies. That would just be daft. We had to find a way to deliver an appropriate contract for both the end users, so mainly primary schools and early year settings and their cooks and chefs, and the producers and suppliers, and obviously the council in between. School chefs needed to deliver over 7,000 meals a day from 42 production kitchens serving about 60 schools. And the catering service at the time was run in-house by Baines. They'd achieved Food for Life served here silver and really wanted to retain that award level, and part of the contract delivery was very much focused around kind of maintaining that high standard. So how and why it worked? Well, the Baines model was born, and we've never escaped it, which we're very, very thankful for. And it was innovative. So whilst dynamic purchasing systems were gradually coming to greater use across the public sector due to kind of changes in the EU regs at the time, There were not many examples of them being used for food, and certainly not in conjunction with the managing tech agent, the way in which we were looking to do it. We took a lot of time with supplier engagement of both food producers and suppliers, but also tech companies. That took probably several months actually, and like an individual and a kind of group engagement. We came to the conclusion in terms of tech, there was nothing quite what we wanted out there. We knew we wanted something. We weren't quite sure what we needed, but we knew what's being offered wouldn't actually fit the bill completely. We decided actually, instead of going for the 5-lot contract that we'd envisaged, we let one contract for the dry and ambient goods to a wholesaler, really just to kind of declutter our minds about the fresh contract that we needed to do. So we then had a contract with a management agent and another one for a dynamic purchasing system. For those who aren't sure what dynamic purchasing systems are, they're a procurement compliant way of letting a contract as a process whereby any supplier can come on board as long as they meet quality criteria. And then they can go into the contract anytime during that contract if they meet those criteria. So for small producers and suppliers particularly, it's a really effective way of getting them engaged in public sector procurement without the stress of having to supply absolutely everything. The go-ahead to proceed from the powers that be was given on the basis that it would cost neutral or deliver cost savings overall. And actually it did, and I'll come to those into a second. So as I mentioned, we knew kind of what we wanted, and Fresh Range, who the tech agent we took at the time, EM, knew they had the tech potential to do it. And in the end, the approach we took was actually co-created by the tech agent and by Baines themselves. Lots of complicated discussions, trying to work out what we needed and what they could do. But it was very much a co-creation product. So both the contract for the managing agent and the DPS were held and owned by Baines, so they could retain control and visibility over the supplier base. Clearly, we had our strategy, our priorities in terms of using local suppliers and didn't really want that diluted. And EM at the time were quite a young company, so that kind of we contained that one. The criteria for suppliers coming onto the DPS was based on quality and quality only at that stage. Price came later through many competitions, so no one was excluded in terms of price. And we were looking for higher welfare produce, and we included that in the selection criteria. We didn't knock people out if they didn't have the higher welfare stuff, but it kind of encouraged them to work towards it through the contract if they could. The single point of contract was via the tech platform, and it increased the visibility to school chefs, and it provided Baines with really good management information, which we just didn't have before. And that was a key bonus to what we were trying to do. Ordering for schools is only available via the tech platform, and it required all school chefs to be provided with iPads and trained how to use them, or tablets, but they got iPads, trained how to use them. Some had no idea, which was interesting in this day and age. You expect everybody to be able to use some sort of tablet for something, even if it's any kind of online Amazon shopping. There were chefs there who had been there for a long time and whose grandchildren and children did that for them, so they had no idea. So whereas before orders had been placed over the phone, which had given previous suppliers the opportunity to upsell, this is now not allowed. But actually the tech agent kept in close contact with the chefs to make sure that they were happy in how it worked and kind of hand-holding that through that. Emergency orders were discouraged, which meant there was agreed delivery dates and times which were adhered to without many ad hoc deliveries needing to be made. We did have local suppliers on the DPS, and delivery to the hub is always different in different ways. So small suppliers often have difficulties actually getting to where their market is. So the tech agent kind of collected on the way back from the school routes. They actually collected from some of the suppliers as well, which made a massive difference in getting that produce into our market. And yes, it was successful. Huge size of relief all round, it must be said, but it was successful. I have to say at the start, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Persuading school chefs to change practices when they've been doing the same thing for a long time took some work, but we got through it all. That was fine, actually quite quickly as well. Getting producers who are unused to the ways of public sector procurement also took some hand-holding. And the procurement team had a couple of rookie areas, which we, in hindsight, we probably should have seen, but we didn't. We hadn't done this before. And the one that always sticks with me, and if you've heard me speak before, you'll hear me say this one again and again, because it really does stick. We had a group of three farmers who worked together. They'd come to all our engagement sessions. We expected them to submit paperwork on the first deadline, which was due in kind of August. Early August. They didn't, and we went back to them saying, what happened? They said, well, we're a mixed farm. We're harvesting from dawn to dusk. The weather, the weather's really good. We don't have time for paperwork. So from the procurement side as well, we learned quite a lot. Similarly, don't ask bakeries to mince pie quotes at Christmas time. As Baines, we had much greater visibility of the supply chain, and we worked with local suppliers in terms of actually changing menus where we needed to. So if projects were too expensive, we could kind of switch them to something else. And a part of that was also around starting to look at menu redesign and how that could work as well. Sometimes when we were switching, we were switching from imported goods, expensive imported goods, to actually local organic vegetable from down the road. And that kind of helped with the getting higher welfare stuff into the schools as well, important for the Food for Life, but also, just better quality product going through as well. Whilst carbon emission reduction wasn't on our radar at the time when developing the contract, it just kind of wasn't. We hadn't thought about it. The emissions reductions were made. Measurements were made from kind of estimating the previous incumbents' emissions to then what was happening over the first year. We made quite substantial emissions reductions on that one. That was kind of a key thing at the end of it, and that worked really, really well. And whilst digital upskilling of chefs might seem an odd thing to claim as a success, as I mentioned, many of those didn't use a computer or tablet before, and bearing in mind that everything is online and digital by default, these were now a group of mature women, let's call them that, who are now able to access digital content, which they probably hadn't been able to before. So yes, it was it was a success. Happy children, happy food, going forward from there. That's a very brief whistle-stop tour of the start of dynamic food procurement. And it's been a great pleasure to be actually working on it right from the start and actually coming to the stage where we are today. It's now being developed and refined to enable it to be upscaled on a national basis. And that really is the way forward to drive a lot of the work we're doing. And it's a way forward for food procurement to kind of fulfill its potential to achieve so many goals, not just calories on a plate, but really.
Right, Chris, I'm going to have to push you along a bit. Sorry to interrupt, but we're losing time.
Yep. Not just calories on a plate, but actually just achieving those many goals. And actually, I have one more slide, which is actually your slide anyway. So as part of that development, I'd like to introduce Dynamic Purchasing UK. It's been established to encourage national uptake of dynamic food procurement model and to share best practice. And stick around for the rest of the sessions because you'll learn how to kind of more about it and establishing a DFP in a region. So yes, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. That's fantastic. And apologies for shoving you along.
No, not a problem at all.
Good. Excellent. So now we've assembled a stellar cast of food activists. And what we're trying to do within this next little session is really to understand why dynamic food procurement might be needed in certain areas of our sector. So without further ado, I'm going to step in. I'm going to introduce James Cashmore. James is Director and Deputy CEO of the Food and Farming at Soil Association and also sits on the Dynamic Food Procurement National Advisory Board. James, welcome. And just, I suppose, taking a stance from Food for Life, from the Food for Life programme and perhaps caterers and health, why do you see a need for dynamic food procurement, James?
There must be a challenging time to be a procurer, mustn't it, Greg? I think in the days where it was okay to think in food procurement about, I don't know, pence per calorie or something like that, quite a narrow definition of quality perhaps relative to the lens that we might put things through today. And it's interesting to see where that's taken us. It's taken us in the UK to quite a consolidated, quite a specialised, quite a nationally focused supply chain that isn't necessarily delivering to its potential in terms of some of the things that as a society we think are important today. So it's not necessarily delivering certain government priorities, for example, against the SME strategy. We're not sure it's really maximising its potential in terms of impact on climate or on nature or on health. And I think the one thing that really hit us in early 2020 was that the system wasn't proving resilient in the face of a significant system shock at a national, global, indeed, level when COVID came along. And we saw all of those difficulties. Remember back to early 2020 when there was a surplus of food that would have liked to have gone to food service. Food service was shut and the supermarket shelves were empty and people wanting to buy and eat in a different context. And that really brought to the surface that lack of resilience that comes with that over-specialized, over-consolidated approach to supply. So it must be a really tough time to be a procurer, mustn't it? To try to take all of those things into account. So how can I broaden that lens of quality to include, delivering government priorities, delivering social environmental value, and delivering resilience? But I think that the potential that exists through dynamic food procurement is the opportunity to allow a new wave of technology that's come along to achieve those wider objectives. And that's why I'm so excited about it. History's littered, isn't it, with industries that have been transformed through technology. And now there is technology available to aggregate smaller suppliers together, to make life easier, to reduce transaction costs from a procurer's perspective. So you can have effectively multiple contracts for similar kind of products. So it just provides an opportunity to add some of those redefined notions of quality, environmental, social impact, resilience to shocks, delivering government priorities. The solution has been, has the potential to deliver against those things. And in particular, because this won't be the last system shock we see, to add that layer of resilience. If you think about the way natural systems work, they work through diversity, and this is and they're resilient because of that diversity. Think of a rainforest, for example, and we could do with taking some of those principles of natural resilience into our economic systems, and dynamic food procurement provides the opportunity to do that. So I'm full of hope for what it could potentially deliver.
Fantastic. And obviously we've worked together over time. So just from the groundswell in the regions, what can the people in the regions, the food hubs, etc., James, what can they do to help your efforts and help us to make those changes?
Well, I think the really important thing is that we recognise that none of us individually at a local level can solve these problems on our own. Excuse me, on our own. So it's very much about coming together, isn't it? Those technology solutions don't need to be reinvented multiple times. Learning from each other and collaborating across our different authorities, our different jurisdictions, and recognizing that we can pool our resources to enable a different kind of platform to come forward. I think that's that would be the thing that I would really hope that comes out from the conversations today and really begins to take some shape over the next year or so.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. I'm going to ask you to mute now and step into the background. And I'm going to bring forward Bethan Cowell from the National Farmers Union. Bethan heads up the food service and procurement element to National Farmers Union. And extremely passionate about that as well, I know. So Bethan, I'm going to fire the same question as you. From a farmer's perspective, why do you think there's a need for dynamic food procurement?
Well, thank you very much, Greg, for having us. Just in short, I'm the National Farmers Union, and we look after 55,000 farmers and growers across England and Wales. Oh, so why dynamic purchasing? Well, I think, first of all, the whole model of it is bringing together buyers and producers in a much shorter supply chain. And that brings multiple value to both, I think, the contracting authority and also to our British farmers and growers and our SME businesses. I think, first of all, a dynamic purchasing model addresses market accessibility issues. I think if we look at the model at the moment, there are contracting authorities that are doing great work out there and buying seasonal and local and supporting British farming. But this way gives better and more direct access for producers and SME businesses into this marketplace. And why is this marketplace important? I suppose we're going through an immense change of time, both in procurement and within farming. We have had EU exit, we've got new challenges come about, and it's really important that all markets work the best that they can and that we build resilience into our food supply. So for me, it's about making sure that, one, that we can supply the public sector as easy as possible, but two, they can buy from British farmers and growers as much as possible, and that can be through multiple of benefits. I spent most of my time talking about the NFU's net zero commitment. If you are a contracting authority looking to address your sustainability goals, being able to, one, buy product at what we've seen from the Baines model, there is value within buying direct. but not just that, that you can specifically work with producers, understand what they're doing, be selective, and buy from, you know, British farmers or local farmers that are also wanting to deliver these sustainability goals and working to tackle climate change. So for me, what does dynamic purchasing bring to the supply chain? It will bring better market accessibility for our food producers, and I think that's so important. And with that, can I say better contracting terms? I think smaller, you know, breaking it down to product level. At the moment, we're dealing with large contracting and tendering processes, which are hard for food producers. It will drive transparency within the market. I think for me, if someone said, well, across the country, what food are you buying, where are you buying it from, we would really not be able to provide an answer. So hopefully looking at new models that are that can drive transparency will be really important for both food producers, but also for buyers and contracting authorities. I think it will underpin and support farming through these agricultural changes. I think building resilience into the food supply is incredibly important. And we want to supply this market. When COVID happened, the amount of farmers that phoned up and said, I want to supply my local school, I want to supply my local hospital. Farmers really care about this marketplace because it's something that's around them all the time. So don't underestimate not just the emotional importance of public sector food procurement, and we really want to deliver healthy, sustainable, nutritious food to your customers. And it also allows us to think differently about the challenges. So that might be buying local, buying more seasonally, buying from net zero food producers, which food and farming will be in 2040. It will allow contracting authorities to really support and integrate and work collaboratively, if I can say that word on a Wednesday morning, collaboratively with the farming community, which for us is fantastic. And I think it's a really positive change and a really good commercial solution.
Thanks very much. I did say that you passionately deliver your response there, which definitely came across. But we've worked together with the NFU, sits on our advisory board in the Southwest Food Hub. We've worked together in engaging farmers. Why do you think it's important that we do in the regions have regional groups that are helping this to come to light?
I think it's really important because I think, one, we have to raise the profile of this marketplace within the farming community. I think it's a market that a lot of people will really want to supply but don't know about. And I think that for many farmers, they want to supply contracting authorities within their local area. So the value of that is really important. How you can, what we want from regional buyers is for these commercial solutions to come about quicker. And when they do so, to make sure that those pre-procurement practices, making sure the market's ready, engage with farmers, is incredibly important. From my perspective, if you are a contracting authority, you know, look at your local supply, look at the farming communities around you, because you know we're really wanting to understand your market, engage with you, and then at the end of the day supply you with our product.
Good. Well, again, thank you very much, Beth. And I'm going to ask you to step back and maybe bring you back in on the Q&A session. And then I'm going to bring to the fore Vicky Hurd. Vicky's from Sustain. She's the head of sustainable farming and a writer, I learned the other day as well. And no pressure at all, Vicky. If you're around there, you're just going to be highlighted. If you can unmute for us, but no pressure at all. But representing planet Earth and the biodiversity in it. And I didn't write these. We'd just I'd like to hear your perspective on how dynamic food procurement could play a part.
Yep, absolutely. 2 minutes on planet Earth, easy. I did list about 10 things when I was thinking about this, but Greg, you'll be pleased I'm not going to say 10 things that could be delivered through dynamic procurement for planet Earth. I'll pick on 2. And Chrissy very luckily covered one of them, which is obviously climate change. There's a real opportunity here to deliver the measured and pledged delivery. You know, a lot of local authorities have made pledges on delivering climate mitigation and supporting farmers that can help you do that, and reducing supply chains can be a really fantastic opportunity. And the model that Chrissy described earlier showed that you can measure it and deliver it. So that's already a massive win, because we all know I don't think I need to tell everybody here how we need to keep within 1.5 degrees rise above pre-industrial levels. Goes without saying, it's critical for the whole planet. The second way in which dynamic procurement, again, has been touched on by previous speakers. James, thank you very much for talking about diversity, because I say diversity rather than biodiversity, because diversity is key to delivering biodiversity and other really useful outcomes such as pollution and mixed farming systems, which can really support soil health, etc., etc. But diversity in farm sizes, a diversity on farm in terms of habitats and hedgerows and messy bits and edges of field, all those things are delivered through a matrix of farm systems. And if we lose that matrix, as farms get large, ever larger, you lose all sorts of things, but you lose that diversity of farm habitats and systems, which are critical for nature recovery. They need the corridors to move through. You need habitats in field and on and around the field. So supporting farmers that are doing things like more rotations, so they've got more different crops. So they've got smaller amounts of more diverse crops. So selling into a dynamic system, absolutely critical for them, and it could be really mean the difference between whether they survive or go under and then get amalgamated into larger farms. So biodiversity needs diversity, and that's also good for diets, we know, and if it's shorter supply chains, you're getting healthier food. So in terms of nature and climate change, both critical issues that we can really help through local authority purchasing and doing dynamic purchasing. So you're supporting the farmers doing those things, changing their practice on farm, producing more diverse cropping and supporting habitats. That's the thing to do.
Thank you very much. And the importance of breaking that down into the regions and have regional hubs that are not just working collaboratively together, but also within their region raising the profile. Why is that important? Absolutely
critical. We actually had a meeting with MPs last week where we had somebody who's doing that from a network perspective, a local and regional network perspective. And he described how he's created a new business called Hodmedod's, which supplies pulses and cereals. He saw it as about a relational issue. It's to do with a relation rather than just transactional. And you can only do that if you're doing closer and more co-creation, closer supply chains, and more co-creation, more interaction. But dynamic procurement provides that tool to do it easily. And we don't have to have all farmers completely up to speed with all the digital requirements, or chefs. It's done for you in some way, but you're also co-creating, moving, being flexible together, and all that matters for biodiversity, for farmers to be able to do what they need to do. We're starting to call that farmer-focused supply chains, and dynamic procurement can be an unbelievably good farmer-focused supply chain by working within the network and having those flows of communication far more easily than a centralized system.
Brilliant, thanks. And I look forward to joining you tomorrow for the Sustain AGM, and perhaps you want to put a link in the chat so we can have a few of these people on that as well. So thanks very much, Vicky. If you'd like to remute, and I'm going to ask to come forward Phil Shelley. Phil is the operational and policy lead for food in the NHS, and it feels a bit strange, Phil, asking you this question because you speak so passionately about why there's a need for dynamic food procurement in the NHS food chain, but perhaps you can share with the audience your views.
Yeah, morning, Greg. Morning, everyone. It's just uplifting already to hear what people are saying, and it feels really joined up as well. Which we're in a time, aren't we, where there's so much going on, and we have a fantastic opportunity. And certainly through the food review, I outlined the clear potential for hospital trusts to work together to promote sustainable procurement. So I'm delighted to be part of today. And of course, as Henry shared earlier, it's nothing new to promote value for society, the environment, and the local economy. I believe that the NHS should be leading dynamic change. We should be a beacon in our community. We need to drive a sustainable procurement, meeting the needs of our local population. Bethan's already said, building relationships with our farmers, our local producers, and our distributors, that gives the direct message that we need around their involvement, around their expertise. We need to continually drive innovation. It's not a one-stop shop. We need to keep on doing it, because the procurement market is changing all the time. So having that flexible model, that will help us to drive seasonal menus. You know, we're already rolling that out in healthcare, and we want that to inspire people to make the change.
Great. And I know that, you know, the NHS is already a great example that's hopping over and doing more active, playing more of a role in the devolved nations. So the importance of having hubs of support, not just across England, but across Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. Why is that important?
Well, James mentioned it earlier around conversations, and there's no doubt that conversations are key. We need to have trust in what's coming forward, and all of us, you know, we need a faith that whatever we step into, it's the right thing to do. And you can feel today that the messages that are coming out are telling us this is the right thing to do. We need to be working with people that have got food value knowledge. They need to understand the demographic of every region. I mean, the Southwest Hub has proved that dynamic food procurement can do this. We've got to learn from the success. We've got to learn from the challenges likewise, if we're going to roll that out to other regions. We've learned more than ever, haven't we, in the last 18 months, that we need to be adaptable. And I think that's so important, that we need to often reshape our aims. We often go in one direction and we stay fixed on that target. I think we need to stay adaptable. This is the perfect time to drive change. And I think we can inspire people as our partnership workers.
Thanks, Phil. We could go on for a little while longer, but I'm going to ask you to step back for today, and I'm going to invite India Stamper to step forward. India is a catering project and implementation lead at Bristol University, and actually has some experience of working with dynamic food procurement. So India, you know, from your perspective, how has it worked within University of Bristol, and what benefits have you seen?
Actually, I'd just like to say, if I could wrap up everything that everyone has said so far and just regurgitate that, I absolutely would, because it is all very true. But I suppose for the universities sort of side of things, it's a bit of a two-pronged approach for us. One of them is the sustainability side, and the other one is the procurement process. So the University of Bristol was the first university in the UK to actually declare a climate emergency in 2019, and has now since pledged to become carbon neutrals by 2030. And eco-consciousness and sustainability run deep within Bristol University. And as part of the catering team, I suppose food is quite a tangible part of the everyday work that universities can contribute towards achieving that carbon neutral goal. And by using a dynamic food procurement method, we can gain real clarity into where our food is coming from, how it's being reared, and the differing food production methods, which offers the people actually purchasing clarity around the produce coming in. As part of our university's food charter, our main aim is to serve local, seasonal and minimally processed foods, and also being able to share the detail in that message with our students is a huge part of educating the future of the people who can help drive the dynamic food procurement forward. So that's the sustainability side for us. And then with the procurement process, in a university setting, procurement of food or procurement is really hard. Our university is keen to partner with lots of SMEs with the idea of keeping the supply chain short. However, universities have to go through rigorous tender processes and get new suppliers to be able to get new suppliers on board, which can often be difficult and arduous for the SMEs themselves, and restricting the suppliers in which universities can purchase from. So a dynamic food procurement system would act as a framework for the universities to partner with, to allow buyers to purchase from the suppliers that they want to buy from and not the ones that they have to buy from.
Brilliant. And I think, you know, your point there about, I mean, I think personally we take food for granted, you know, but as you've identified, you know, it's a major lever for change, because it's something we do every day and numerous times if we're lucky. and it can promote other benefits as well. So just then, I mean, you managed to do what you've done, perhaps with working directly with the pioneers, but without perhaps a food hub infrastructure around you. How do you see that others in other regions might see the having a benefit of a hub to support them through the dynamic food procurement process?
So I think, as a few people have quite rightly said so far, I think it would be bringing people together to continue the educating of our sectors, opening up new networking opportunities to ensure that we are all remaining on the same page, and bringing key stakeholders together to try and incite the change. And regarding support from sort of buying organisations, for universities specifically, becoming part of an automatic framework like TUCO, which is the University Catering Organisation, that would be incredibly beneficial and make using a structure like DPUK have created even easier. So TUCO is like a one-stop shop for universities looking for suppliers, where difficult tender processes are taken out of the university's hands, and all that hard work has kind of been done for them by TUCO. And those frameworks open up the doors for lots of suppliers looking to enter the education market, getting the green light from TUCO and automatically allowing universities to trade from them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Very thorough. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but if I can again ask you to move please, India, and I'm going to bring forward Andrew Knight, who's a commercial manager from the Ministry of Justice, and invite Andrew to just share with us. I mean, many will question how dynamic food procurement could work with prisons, Andrew, but why do you think it can play a role in future?
Our interest in dynamic food procurement is it's clearly an agenda set by government. We're very interested in keeping abreast of what's happening within the industry. We currently feed 78,000 prisoners a day through the contracts, and part of our contracts is the promotion of UK production and SME involvement, and we have 65% of our spend, our total spend, is through SMEs, and 55% is through UK production. And it's the first point of, if we're looking at new products or replacement products, the first point is, can we maintain the UK and SME involvement within the contracts? We've kind of in these contracts worked in reverse of dynamic procurement, where we're offering to some SMEs a national base with our current supplier, so they produce and then the logistics is done by the supplier, and that's driven opportunity not only with the MOJ contracts but also with a national food supplier for SMEs and UK producers, knowing that we're actively seeking out those products. We've got two strands to our bow. So number one is we're looking to provide UK and SME food at value for money to the public, and the quality of that food within prisons is one of the things that helps with our dynamic security. So food is one of the three things in prisons that are extreme. You know, it controls the temperature of the prison, so you don't mess about with the food, and it's always produced to an excellent standard. I think it's produced to an excellent standard. There's also an educational aspect to what we do in prisons, where we, referring back to some of the other panelists, where we're looking to change habit, and moving away from processed food into, and you know, most of our cooking is scratch cooking. We also have a production side, and the dynamic procurement system would again aid prisons in educating prisoners on where food comes from, how it's produced, and how there are business opportunities there for people to start businesses and sell that on a national or local basis, but on a national platform.
And that's already happening, isn't it? You know, in some cases.
That's already happening. Yeah, we make products in prisons from local produce and then go out the prisoners take that out to farmers markets and sell that on farmers markets, and that gives them a full circle of where the ingredients come from to the end users. And again, that's an educational tool and a resettlement opportunity for prisoners on release from prison.
It goes beyond simple supplying, and obviously, there are initiatives like Clink and like other, at other places as well, where potentially, the dynamic procurement process could actually allow prisons to supply into it as well as being, supplied by it, which is quite exciting.
Absolutely, we're even considering, because the difficulty of getting UK produced foods in some areas, we're even looking at doing our own production of that and providing it to ourselves, but also then selling it on to the public. We also buy from local farms and sell on to visitors to the prison. So what's grown on the prison farm is then sold to visitors and families of prisoners visiting on visit stay.
Brilliant. Well, I'm being encouraged to wrap up this session, Andrew, but thanks very much. Fascinating insight. And, I'm sure there'll be further conversation to have. But at this point, I'd like to say just thanks to all of our experts for their insight there. And as I say, if we've got specific questions for them, please add them into the Q&A and not into the chat. So still with me, I think now I'm going to adeptly try and just share, as part of spreading the word to support the national rollout of Dynamic Purchasing UK, and we've created a short film. So I'm just going to run the film now, but what I would also advise, as I, with fleet of foot, turn to this film, I would also like to advise that we are going to start the Q&A when the break is on, just in light of time.
Challenges in their history with limited resources. Dynamic Purchasing UK, or DPUK, has been established to support the national rollout of dynamic procurement, which can deliver significant social, economic and environmental outcomes. This is a levelling up opportunity that also supports the journey to net zero by directly addressing the climate and biodiversity crises. The first area to address is food. The food supply chain presents a devastating range of issues that have been left on the back burner for too long, in part due to being deemed too complicated to address. Whilst it is true that the food system causes harm, it actually holds the key to positively addressing so many of the world's biggest issues today. Whilst local authorities themselves typically spend relatively little on food these days, overall food spend makes up a sizable slice of their total economy. If led in the right direction, this spend can deliver regenerative regional economic impact. But first, let's consider the social and environmental reasons why food supply deserves the attention of anchor institutions. Food is the second biggest cause of greenhouse gas emissions by humans. Yet the true causes of emissions in food and farming are not widely understood, and so making changes in this area has historically been challenging. Most food system emissions are generated in the production approach taken by farms. This is followed by changes to land use, such as deforestation to grow crops to feed the animals that humans eat. Farmers have been driven to intensive farming practices to meet the food industry's relentless focus on producing large volumes of ever cheaper food. These intensive farming practices are largely responsible for the biodiversity crisis we face today, with more than half of all species in the UK wiped out over the past 50 years. Food security is at an all-time low since the war, and some are predicting this could worsen further, with common agricultural policy reforms and farm labour shortages causing farmers to exit the market. Food poverty, diet-related disease, water pollution and overuse, soil contamination and decreasing soil fertility are all also major issues in most regions of the UK. Supply chain transparency is crucial in order to make informed choices to help make the changes needed. To deliver this transparency, we need shorter food supply chains. DPUK can address all of these issues by supporting food procurers to implement dynamic food procurement. Dynamic food procurement has already been successfully trialled in Bath, where 35,000 meals a week were provided in the region's primary schools using this supply chain approach. The pilot allows SME producers to access a market previously difficult to penetrate, and resulted in both environmental and financial cost reductions. As a result, the National Food Strategy, commissioned by the government, directly recommends the use of dynamic food procurement technology. Support for the dynamic food procurement model is broad. As a result, in late 2020, a government inquiry led by the EFRA Committee called for the immediate application of dynamic food procurement across the UK, consistent with the Bath pilot. Dynamic food procurement uses dynamic purchasing systems with supporting electronic catalogues and innovative technology underpinning the logistics process. This specialist technology creates an open digital marketplace that facilitates efficient short supply chain infrastructure. DPUK is to work with regional food network organisations similar to the South West Food Hub to bring together producers, logistic providers and buyers. Technology now exists to enable chefs to order food directly from SME producers nearby and receive a consolidated next-day delivery and consolidated invoice from an efficient local logistics provider. This is an opportunity for an economic transformation, led by anchor institutions and delivered by existing local SMEs. The regional economic transformation potential for dynamic food procurement is huge. Research shows that for every £1 spent with local producers, there is a £3 return into the local economy. Directing food spend to local SMEs has the potential to generate tens of millions of pounds of additional value into the local economy each year. It's not only the economics that are transformational, though. The social value impact of changing food supply chains could well be far more important. Dynamic food procurement creates more transparent supply chains. This means the production approach taken at farm level, which is responsible for the largest greenhouse gas emissions in the food system, can be measured and used to make more informed choices in menu and producer selection. Similarly, accountability on biodiversity and water and soil health can be upheld when fewer intermediaries exist in the chain. In addition, by using dynamic food procurement to drive more freshly picked, healthy and seasonal produce into public sector menus, we can help to inspire healthier eating habits, which could have massive ongoing positive health outcomes amongst those most in need. It will also help to level up rural communities by supporting local producers and farmers, some of whom could be at risk of closure. The opportunity to realise dynamic food procurement is here. DPUK has been formed as a coordinating body to support the process of a central purchasing organisation being formed by anchor institutions. The next step is for anchor institutions to indicate their interest. Please get in touch using the contact details on screen. Thank you for listening.
Okay, and we'll make that available obviously after the event, and we'll re-emphasize those contact details at the end. So excuse me because I've got noise in my background. Okay, that's better. It rolled into the next presentation. I think I was going to watch some rugby or something. Anyway, so the next session is all really based around is how we can regionally develop hubs that can support dynamic food procurement. And I think the first person to speak there is myself. So I better fire up my slides. I suppose from a Southwest perspective, from the Southwest Food Hub's perspective, what motivated us is we knew that we would be disruptive and we needed to look professional, organised, qualified and believable. So for us, first and foremost was forming an organisation, and we chose a community interest company. We chose to make sure that wherever we were presenting, that we had a consistent format. And Ellen, who's and Amy, that have been very instrumental in bringing today's event together, helped us with that significantly. And so therefore, you know, we looked as if we meant business. And then really for us, it was about making connections within the region, making sure that we were in touch with the key influencers, the key people that are going to make things happen. And very early stages, bringing together an advisory board with such experts. So representation on our advisory board, as I said earlier, from National Farmers Union. We've got the Earl and Lady Devon as part of our board, not because of their influence, but mainly because they're extremely passionate about food and drink in the region. We had the Lord Lieutenant of Devon, David Thurston, is on our advisory board, and David's involved in a number of agri-food projects across the region, as well as being chairman of Dyson Alex Stevens from NFU policy, regional policy lead, and obviously the likes of Carl, who we're going to introduce shortly. So having people that not just to be able to showcase and demonstrate that people believe, but also people that can really bring together thoughts and help us to shape how we might approach and drive forward the activities within the region, and developing key stakeholders as well, not just that are passionate about food, but that can make the differences. So forming the links with people in the institutions, the colleges, the universities, the hospitals, the schools, not allowed into the prisons, but quite yet, but actually just forming some connections there to be able to understand what their challenges are and what their needs are. And very often what we learn is that, you know, we're quick to lay blame at purchasers not buying correctly, but often it's down to the fact that the opportunity is not open to them to buy more flexibly and also to buy more dynamically. So that's what we learn from bringing these stakeholders together. So in terms of what we did and what we continue to do really is to reach out and build awareness of dynamic food procurement events such as today. And I'm sure many of you attended some of our events before, but also what's been quite critical for us is lobbying with our local and national politicians, Neil Parish pictured here in full flow, but to make sure that it's on their agenda. I mean, we all talk about there's a sweet spot now where you know, food is very high up the agenda, and there's probably a unique opportunity, a unique window of opportunity for us to make change, but that will close. And if we don't take advantage of that, it's really going to be looked back upon as a missed opportunity, as Henry Dimbleby talked about earlier. So as well as having intelligent conversation with stakeholders and with people who want to make a change, what's been important is to keep that dialogue in the public eye and making sure that where we can, we shout about stories. And you know, really there's a hungry market out there in the press, online, on radio, on TV, to actually start to pull back together this fractured supply chain, because actually people, the public in general, are very unaware of some of the issues that exist. So very much communication, lobbying, making a difference, and then it's a lot of really of rinse and repeat. And whilst, you know, all of our time is of a premium, and you know, we've been able to get some funding which covers about sort of 20% of our work. Really, what drives us is our passion about fixing our broken food system, and making a difference, and that's really what keeps us involved in this, along with the encouragement of other like-minded people like yourselves in driving it forward. So I wanted to make my section very short because I'm conscious that many people might have seen it before. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to ask Carl Tucker to join us. And Carl is the chairman of the Heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership, amongst other roles, including the exec chair of Yo Valley, and a trustee of many local charities. And Carl, Heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership kindly stepped forward to help to fund the Southwest Food Hub. So question for you really is what made you, on behalf of the LEP, step forward and support us?
Morning, Greg. Yeah, thanks. The local enterprise partnerships, as you'll know, have got a responsibility to help drive economic growth and productivity in the regions they operate in. And in the Heart of the Southwest, very keen on doing that on a clean and inclusive basis. So that video just talked about that, which is really useful. Productivity increases come from either selling more or producing more with the same level of resource, or producing the same and selling the same with less resource. Not entirely sure that's understood by some people in government, but that's a basic definition of productivity in my head anyway. Agriculture, food and drink represent a significant part of the economy here in the Southwest. So it's a really important sector for us, and we need to see productivity gains through that. So it's really important that we support this. And we do see this as a real chance to provide some economic growth and in building resilience into that sector within the region, through all the things you've been talking about so far. The public procurement space has, for a very long time, as we've discussed many times, been seen as a potential new market for SMEs and local producers. However, it's been very difficult for us to break into that sector. And after 25 years of talking about it, you know, I'm really hopeful this time that we may have come up with something. we've been brilliant Europeans for the last 40 years. We really latched on to the value for money concept in public procurement. And I think some of the practitioners on the call today are far more enlightened, but there is a case that value for money for us has meant know the cost of everything but the value of nothing. And hopefully we got some way to moving towards changing that. There are 4 key elements, I think, which are really required to make this happen. One is political will and leadership, and I think we're starting to see that come through. I think we need to see more of it, but certainly for people like Andrew, who just spoke earlier, I think there is a growing desire to engage with this more actively. I think there does need to be a shift, a bit of thinking and culture away from that knowing the cost of everything, but I think over time that's coming. What we also need is a really good understanding what the market looks like. What does it need? What does it want? How many carrots? What shape do they want them? What format do they want them in? How often do they need them? So that we can then match that up with the capabilities within our supply chain in the region, and make sure that we can try and get people to supply into that. And then you obviously need the platform to facilitate it, which is what this dynamic procurement piece is all about. We don't have, at least I don't believe, we've got lots of farmers and growers out sat there with loads of product they're not selling. So we've either got to find ways to encourage them to divert existing produce into that market, but ideally encourage them to grow even more, so that it can service this new market and then really start to see growth within the region. That needs to be economically viable for them, so we need to understand that, but it may also mean that we need to find opportunities for investment in new processing facilities, supply chain facilities within the region to facilitate and meet that market need. So yeah, it's been really great listening to everybody this morning. I think we've got huge opportunities. The comments in the chat, certainly around regenerative agriculture, which is something at Yo Valley which we are very heavily getting behind, and have been doing for 20 odd years, being organic farmers. I'm very keen to see all that come through. So I'm hopeful, but we do need to keep banging the drum, and we mustn't give up. We've got to keep fighting for this because it's so important for the region and for the population.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And yeah, I know how passionate you are, so very well behaved on that bit there, Carl, as well. And and also, I mean, I think one of the things that you've been central to, and what's happened really nicely in the Southwest region, is that you've worked together with the county, local authorities, county authorities, and also with the NFU in the likes of, there's a great piece of research being done about supply and demand at the moment. So perhaps what advice could you lend to some of the other regions where perhaps they're just starting out in terms of getting the support of their local enterprise partnerships and their local authorities and other interested stakeholders to come together and work collaboratively in their own region as well as working with us nationally?
That's a good question. You need people with desire, you need people with passion, and people who understand it. And clearly, there are a lot of people on this call today who understand this stuff. So you've just got to keep pushing. If you believe in it, if you believe in what we're trying to achieve, and if we believe that there's a better way going forward, you've just got to convene those people to come together and have discussions, talk about the benefits for a region, talk about the benefits for the country, all the biodiversity, the shorter supply chain, everything. But people need to talk, and people need to be open-minded to looking at doing things differently.
That's brilliant. Well, I'm gonna thank you for joining us, Carl, there, and again, perhaps if any specific questions around Carl, then please add them into the Q&A. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Glenn Woodcock, co-founder of the Southwest Food Hub. Glenn's involved in many projects that are leading change for the good across our region. And Glenn's just going to sort of delve a little bit into what happens next with the Dynamic Purchasing UK and Dynamic Food Procurement costs and process. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Greg. I've no doubt most of you are here not just to hear about the benefits of dynamic food procurement, but also to think about and go away and start working on how you can get that working in your region, and that's what I want to talk about now. Dynamic Food Procurement, the organisation, has been set up, as Greg and Chrissy both said earlier, to try to mobilise groups to work on that in each of the regions. Dynamic food procurement was, as been mentioned already, featured in the National Food Strategy, and in that strategy it was highlighted that something in the region of £3 million of capital investment would be required to get a sustainable ongoing national capability for dynamic food procurement working. We have been, the Southwest Food Hub, been working on this project for 3 years, mainly with central government looking at the Southwest as a pilot region. We found ourselves in a position where we really have to pivot now, and I think it's important really that we focus on mobilising the regions ourselves. And since most of the economic and sustainability and environmental benefits of rolling this system out sit with the regions, I think it really makes much more sense that we in the regions take ownership of that. So with that in mind, our proposal is that we break the UK into 12 regions, and that we look to set up organisations which, in a sense, mirror the Southwest Food Hub in each of those regions to be the activists and the mobilisers in those regions for dynamic food procurement. It does mean that we are going to have to raise money, and we have to raise money in each of those regions. Our proposal is that for each of those regions, spread amongst the anchor institutions of those regions, some £200,000 worth of capital is raised in the form of a loan, and that loan would be repaid by the network with a 3% over LIBOR coupon. So it's not a gift, it's not a grant, it's a loan. But there would also be some one-off setup fees, and those one-off setup fees would have to be focused not at a regional level, but at a county level. So we have to think of, I guess, sort of three ways in which we're mobilising the UK. There is the national level, there's the regional level, and there will be the county level. And the funds that are raised are essentially to start up the food hubs for the region, the managing agent for the UK, and to help fund county level data integration.
Welcome aboard Great Western Railway Service to London Paddington.
We're now mobile. If we could mute, please, that'd be great.
I've got you, Greg. Can you mute yourself? Thanks. I think we're only going to dip into this this process, because what we're talking about is what the operating model and business model and the processes for mobilisation we're going to have to go through, and we'll get into a lot more detail after this. And the main purpose of today is just to get people excited. So this is just kind of a taster of what we'll have to be working on. So we have the next slide. Where we are actually in the Southwest is, we're in a very exciting position where we do have a lot of executive support from the county and from the anchor institutions, and we're at the point now where we're beginning those conversations about bringing those organisations together and asking them for the funding, and we believe we have very strong support to provide that. Nevertheless, all those institutions are under a great deal of financial pressure themselves. They recognise the strategic need to do this, but there's a big difference between having willingness and actually getting to the point where they part with their funds. And so over the next few months, that's what we want to do to work with you, is to try to help you understand how you make that case. Also, however, I do want to say something very briefly about some very exciting development with some philanthropic organisations, in particular the Dixon Foundation, which is a food and farming focused philanthropic organisation, who will be announcing a aligned food procurement county challenge on the 17th of January. And this will be specifically designed to help with you in the regions, forming your food hubs and getting the support of your anchor institutions. So I'd really encourage you to follow up on that after this meeting, and getting mobilised and getting ready to take advantage of that and to work with your anchor institutions will make a really big difference to the likelihood of you being able to get hold of some of that matched funding to help set up your dynamic food procurement in the regions. And yes, it will cover anyone in the UK. So next slide. One of the things that in your regions you have to become proficient at is making the business case for getting the anchor institutions to release the funds to move forward. And I think those at the high level business case focuses on the costs and the benefits. So if we just briefly look at what the costs would be at the point that we procure the managing agent, for the buyers, we envisage no setup fees and no ongoing fees. For the logistics providers, no setup fees, but they would have to pay a software as a service fees of something in the region of £2,000 a month, which we understand is the equivalent of perhaps one full-time employee, but the benefits to logistics providers I think are very strong and will help you learn how to articulate that. For the procurers themselves, we envisage no setup fees, no ongoing fee, and a free standard reporting. But for the to have no fees and no friction for both the procurers and the buyers is extremely important, because we want to make it as easy as possible for the key customers to come on board. And for the producers themselves, again, we see no setup fees, no ongoing fees, but potentially some kind of product collection fees. But the managing agent platform, the costs for the logistics providers, and financing costs, for instance, things like invoice financing, and also the local support of the food hubs themselves, which of course will require some kind of funding, would all come from margin that would be charged on food delivery itself over time. But nevertheless, we still envisage that this would be ultimately would mean that the costs to the procurer would be the same or less. So for the next slide, we've already talked quite a lot about this, but of course, you will have to become very proficient at making the case for cost effectiveness, as well as, of course, all of the other benefits that come with dynamic food procurement. And we will at DP UK help you to do that. So next slide. What I want to just talk about briefly now is what you can do next. The first thing I think that is important to do is to register your interest with DP UK, and you can do that by going on our website. And on our website, you'll find our contact details. Get in touch, and we will help both provide you with necessary materials and also support on key meetings, but also help to coordinate you with other people who may also be interested in your region. So I think in order for us to provide that coordinating role, it's very, very important that you get in touch. We will provide you with materials. The first set of materials that you will receive will be the presentation that you've seen now and is already available. We will also be providing you with a resource pack and a set of answers to the questions that are being raised during the meeting today. What you can then do is start to spread the word. I can't emphasize how important this is. Henry said himself, what's key now, and this was emphasized by Carl as well, is we've really got to raise the volume on this at a national level. So mobilize your MPs, mobilize your local politicians, get in touch with your county, with your anchor institutions, your hospitals, your multi-academy trusts, colleges, universities, etc. Because the more noise we can create around this, the better. But ultimately, what you'll be looking to do is to try to bring together, and this is where it becomes more of a county level, bring together your the leading institutions, the ones who are most likely to move first, to bring them together and to begin the process of creating the institution at the regional level that will be necessary to engage with dynamic food procurement. And that's where it starts to become more technical. And again, when that becomes relevant, we'll provide you with the documentation, training, detailed operating models, assistance on conversations about what this will look like from a legal point of view. So just to re-emphasize again, please get in touch, work with the institutions in your region, and what we'll be doing is we'll be working towards trying to actually mobilize working dynamic food procurement in your area. So thank you very much for that, and look forward to working with you all in the future.
Thanks, Glenn. That's brilliant. Great oversight. And yeah, don't worry, you don't have to take all this in. All this information will be available afterwards. So we're officially in our break. But what we will do in light of time, and I'm very excited about this next session, which when we take a little bit of a broader view on the food sector and have some really leading activists delve into what might be in store in the future of food. But before we sort of move to that, so if you'd like to take a break, we will forgive you, but we're going to continue to answer to take on some of the questions. What I should emphasize is we've had loads of questions. We will formulate this into a Q&A, into a proper report makes available to everyone, and we'll answer a few now, but we definitely won't be able to answer them all. So, but as I say, we won't avoid any of them. They will all be answered in due course and made available to you. So if I can just, I'm going to ask Bethan to unmute because I know she's got to get off to another meeting. So I want to make sure that we give her something to think about before she goes. So the question, Bethany, are you unplugged? Thank you. Good. Yeah. Were you on your break? They're going to make a cup of tea. So the question that's coming is, will small scale farmers keep their profit margin or do, oh, no, sorry, that's not, it's a different question, sorry. Does the dynamic food procurement system favour foods that are sustainably produced to encourage farmers to transition to regenerative practices?
Does it
I think that, so more summarised, you know, it is are we all trying to nurture farming towards a more regenerative future?
So I think there are multiple factors which are pushing farming further along, but at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that we incentivise that. I think what the gentleman from Year Valley said about making sure that you take farmers along the journey, that you provide that marketplace, you allow for investment is very important. For farmers to invest in new technologies to deliver net zero, to address biodiversity, to get more efficient and look at productivity, you've got to make sure that they are confident, that on-farm confidence is high, that they have the funds to invest. So I think there's a huge role in dynamic purchasing because you're essentially linking up the producer with the buyer, and therefore there's more conversation. So why would a producer, you know, we are on a massive journey with so much around environment, especially around our net zero commitment. But why would a producer, you know, invest if there isn't that market for it? So naturally, by dynamic purchasing system that's saying, you know, I want a product that is net zero, I want to buy local, I want to buy seasonal, you're naturally already putting that pre-procurement structure in where you're getting that market and getting that producer ready, and you're providing that kind of business case to invest, albeit you, with the schemes, with ELMs, with lots of different factors that go around, farmers are already on a very strong sustainable journey. And I would say that British farming itself is some of the most sustainable, some of the most brilliant food systems in the world in terms of how we're addressing these challenges. But yeah, I think there's a huge role in that. But I also think that, and just going back to the point, I think that dynamic purchasing systems allow the contracting authority to have that choice and allow that contracting authority to choose with that button. And that's really important. So when you provide that greater connectivity, if you are a contracting authority and you are wanting a specific product, you're choosing that more directly, and I think that is a real value for it.
I think that's a huge point, is that, you know, whilst at entry level, you know, the buyers and sellers could join a public sector dynamic food procurement system and do what they've always done. What we're sure of with such a system is that because it won't be time bound, is that people can make choices to trade up through the standards if it so suits their environment, their establishment, and their price parameters. So I think it's really important. Thanks, Bethan. We'll forgive you. Class dismissed. Thank you very much indeed. So just I'm going to just do one more, and then I'm going to pass on to the group. There was a question in the chat about how are local distributors involved. And I think that's really key. Is distributors or food logistics providers are critical to the delivery of dynamic food procurement. They're the enabler for primary producers and cannot deliver their own produce, So, you know, the idea is that the produce would be consolidated through the dynamic food procurement technology, and then the logistics providers working within their systems, which will be adapted to work with the actual DFP platform, will then provide the consolidated delivery solution to the procurers, to the purchasing establishments, anchor institutions. So very much involved, very engaged, and will continue to be so. So in light of time, and we do want to keep to time, we will sacrifice the rest of the questions to the written Q&A. And now I'm actually going to pass over to Adele, Adele Jones from the Sustainability Trust. On the basis I was going to pass to Patrick. Patrick's on a train, so you're going to step in, Adele, which is brilliant. And this session really is an open session for you to talk about future food elements, with a little train of public sector procurement running through. I'll just introduce other speakers involved. We've got Tom Andrews, who's the director of Sustainable Food Places. We've got Rob Percival, head of food policy at the Soil Association. And Patrick will be joining us in and out from the train. So Adele, if I can hand over to you, and I'll step back for a second.
Thank you very much, Greg, and apologies for the last minute change to the agenda. I only found out about it 2 minutes ago. So we're going to switch roles today. Yep. We're going to switch roles. I'm going to chair this session, and I'll bring Patrick in to speak perhaps once he's passed this tunnel, which I know he's about to go into between Bristol and Bath. So we'll go from there. So my name is Adele Jones. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of the Sustainable Food Trust, and delighted to be here today. And thank you, Greg, and all the team at Southwest Food Hub. It's been a fantastic discussion, really important discussion so far. So really happy to be here with Rob Percival, Tom Andrews, both got huge experience in working in this area. Rob at Head of Food Policy at Soil Association, and Tom, Director of Sustainable Food Cities. So before I bring them in to make some remarks about this, I'll just state a few things from our perspective at the Sustainable Food Trust, and then I'll bring Patrick in at the end. We are really passionate about this area of procurement of local food, but I think we come at it from the perspective of, you know, local food is obviously fantastic. We want to decentralize our supply chains, and we need to think about what infrastructure is needed to support that transition. So we do a lot of work supporting the need for local abattoirs in particular, because you really can't have local meat without local abattoirs, which is important. But I think it's also important to say that, you know, whilst local food is brilliant, we need to make sure it's the right kind of local food, and we need to help farmers go on that transition towards becoming more sustainable, and then be able to measure that progress over time, so that as well as local authorities, schools, hospitals, etc., being able to select producers that are in their local area and support that food system, to make sure that they're also making decisions based on sustainability of those farms, and that in doing so, hopefully we're helping farmers make those incremental improvements year on year towards being better in sustainability. And this links to our work on the Global Farm Metric, which, for those who don't know, is a common framework for measuring on-farm sustainability. And we're working now with a coalition of over 60 organizations to try and, you know, not reinvent the wheel, not create a new framework, but try and bring everyone's thinking together on metrics for farm sustainability. And by that, I mean economic, environmental and social sustainability on farms. So I still will share a couple of slides if that's okay, because I think it's easier to explain this when you can see it. And hopefully you can see that. Do shout if you can't. But yeah, as I said, the Global Farm Metric is a framework that provides a whole farm perspective on sustainability, and it's a single set of categories, indicators and metrics for measuring farm sustainability. And our ambition, hence the name Global Farm Metric, is for this framework to be common for every single farmer across the world. And of course, what good looks like will vary in different parts of the world, and exactly how this framework should apply will vary in different parts of the world. But there's no reason why, akin to the financial accounting standards, all farmers should be using a common framework and a common language for measuring sustainability, and should be incentivized to make incremental improvements based on that common framework. And so this is basically what it looks like. And initially, this framework was developed by farmers. We have been working on it for about 6 or 7 years now with a working group of farmers, and really we sort of put the challenge back to them initially and said, look, what are you guys measuring at the moment in terms of audits and applications that you have to do for various funding or access to markets? And we looked at all those things in the round and then asked them which bits of those are most useful. Which bits of those actually help them make better management decisions on farm. And this is roughly what we came up with. It's obviously developed quite a bit since then, but it's got 11 categories of assessment. It covers things like soil, water, biodiversity, through to animal welfare, and then through to social capital, human capital, which focuses on both your workers on farm and then your impact on the local community, which is obviously really, really relevant to this conversation. So this is a framework that we're now developing, as I said, in partnership with a whole host of organizations, and really trying to hone in on each of these categories and work out what the individual metrics should be. So we're working with food companies, retailers, the farming unions, certification bodies, farmers, of course, banks, investors, to really understand what this framework should look like and how we can co-create it together, basically. And in terms of practically how it looks for farmers, we have developed a self-assessment, and we're not suggesting that will be the only way that this framework is applied, but we sort of, to be able to get more feedback from farmers and also some of the other key stakeholders, we needed a way of testing this on farms. And so this is what this looks like at the moment. Farmers go through each of the categories, input information based on the common metrics, and then they get a sort of spider diagram or a radar diagram at the end, which shows them their whole farm sustainability. It looks a bit strange on this picture because only 5 of the categories are filled in, but you can get a sense of what it starts to look like once that data is inputted, and it gives you a really nice snapshot. So our suggestion is, and what we're lobbying DEFRA and the National Food Strategy team and devolved nations as well on this, is that a sustainability assessment should form an integral part of the new support schemes for farmers, so ELMS and the equivalent in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, so that government can really easily see how well and where public goods are being delivered, and what from that, what policy interventions they can introduce to help farmers make those transitions. But also that this framework should be used to inform future procurement and supply chain transparency, because wouldn't it be great if on the procurement hub, as well as being able to see the location of farms and what produce they have in what quantities, also to be able to see the relative sustainability of that farm and be able to make decisions based on that as well. So I'll stop there and go back to Zoom on my screen. I've lost Zoom, so I can't see you, but I'll bring it back in a second. And I think I'll hand over to Rob next, if that's okay, Rob, to give your thoughts on this. And then Tom, I'll come to you, and then hopefully Patrick will be out of the tunnel and we can hear from him last.
That's great. Thanks, Adele. Hi, everyone. I work across the Food for Life programme at the Soil Association, which has spent the last 15, 20 years trying to improve the food served in schools. And there's a really interesting link, I think, that can be drawn between this work you're doing, Adele, at the farm level, the Dynamic Food Procurement platform, and the experience that children have of food in schools. We have a school award that we've been running for a number of years that encourages a whole school approach. It supports children to be cooking and growing and out visiting farms. And we've seen some really significant shifts in children's eating behaviours through that programme. Children in Food for Life schools are twice as likely to eat their 5 a day. They eat a third more fruit and veg overall. And the independent evaluation that we've done of the scheme that we've worked with academic partners to undertake has shown that shift in dietary behaviour is partly because children are inspired to eat more fruit and veg. It's not because they've been taught that they should in a sort of strict nutritional sense. It's because they've been handling food, they've been growing it, they've been cooking, and they've been out on farms. And the food served in the school canteen has a story behind it. Children are taught that through that dining hall experience, that food is something exciting, something important. And this really surprising, not surprising, but significant and unprecedented shift in dietary behaviour that we've seen in Food for Life schools has been facilitated by those elements all coming together. And I think what Dynamic Food Procurement offers is an opportunity for local, more agroecological, more sustainable producers to supply into schools in a way which can help generate those stories, create some of that really inspiring content for those who are trying to weave a narrative in schools around what good food looks like, and help children reconnect with where their food comes from in a way that does support them to eat differently. The School Fruit and Veg scheme is another interesting case study wherein dynamic food procurement could be applied. This is a scheme that provides all children with in years 4 to 6, I believe, with a piece of fruit or veg each day. But the quality we know is not very good. A lot of it's imported. A lot of it doesn't arrive very fresh. It's supplied through very centralized supply chains. And though we have seen some good progress in recent years in getting higher quality produce on the plate, a dynamic procurement approach could really shift the experience that children have of that fruit and veg by introducing them to local suppliers, seasonal produce, a variety of textures and flavors that are local, that are derived from their local landscape. And it's this more holistic view of food education that the National Food Strategy was pushing, both in its support for Taste Ed and Food for Life, two school food education programs. And dynamic food procurement can sit in the center of that. I think we've talked a lot today about how it can support local economies and the work that it can do on behalf of farmers. But I think we should think of children, school children, and also in other sectors, hospital patients and so on, as key beneficiaries of the national rollout of this approach.
Thank you very much, Rob. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Adele. Like you, so much learned today, absolutely extraordinary day. And I need to share this with all the people we work with. A bit of background for those who don't know, sustainable food places now, not sustainable food cities. So we are working with over 70 local cross-sector food partnerships, which involve local authorities, businesses, NGOs and others across the UK. And they are trying to work on all aspects of food system transformation, from health to food poverty to food economy, etc., etc. And one of the areas that they all recognise is incredibly important if you want to shift the food system, procurement sits right at the heart of it. It's one of the biggest levers we've got. The reason why I mentioned the cities to places, which means that we're now involved with a lot of counties and boroughs and districts, rural agricultural areas rather than urban consumption areas, is that they are really seeing the need to work on that supply chain element. You know, you don't have a lot of production in the city areas. They're doing a lot around demand, but there is now a real drive to understand how to help shift the system in supply terms. And it sounds to me like the dynamic food procurement piece is the bit that's really missing and would really help those 70 plus food partnerships across the UK to work around this agenda. James mentioned the phrases learning from each other, collaborating across borders, replicating good ideas. There's obviously a fantastic model here in the Southwest. Luke asked the question in the chat. Luke Owen said, is there something special about the Southwest which means that we couldn't do it elsewhere? My gut feeling is no, but I think what we need to do, as so many people have said, is somehow get all of that's been talked about today into the ears of the people who can make it happen locally. So one of the things I would love to do, Glenn, utterly inspired by your plan, that's what I'll describe it as, across the 12 regions, the 9+3. I think we should be working closely together to try and make sure that all of the food partnerships we're working with are able to engage with what you're talking about and help to make that change happen on the ground. The other one that really resonated with me, hearing from Carl at Heart of the Southwest LEP, it feels like the LEPs are absolutely critical in this space. It's quite a while ago, I think it was the West of England partnership, and we had a conversation with them, triggered by them 10 years ago, around the idea of making a big investment into essentially local food production, supply and distribution in order to create jobs, prosperity, and those are the things that are going to resonate most. And the conversation got quite advanced, and we thought this is going to go somewhere. And in the end, they backed off. And the reason I think that they backed off is the LEPs at the time had this feeling that the easiest thing to work with was big investments in single sites. So, you know, do a new aerospace thing, you know, Avonmouth or whatever else. And they backed off. But what this feels like to me is that if we can persuade LEPs that there is a platform there that can drive jobs, businesses, prosperity, and all of the other outcomes around health, sustainability and health, we may actually get them to invest quite significantly in it. Greg, you asked Carl the question, what advice do we need from other areas, you know, to get other areas to do this? I think it's all peer-to-peer. I think if people can hear Carl, who are in other LEPs, they will listen. They won't listen to me. They probably won't listen to you guys. So in all of this, I think we need to get the people who are the farmers talking to the farmers, the food partnerships talking to the food partnerships, and there are many already involved in this in the Southwest, and the LEPs talking to each other. But I feel utterly inspired, I have to say. It feels like we've been struggling with this for years, and it feels like you kind of filled out a space of a sort of gaping hole in that food systems change that we all want to drive forward. So very excited by it. The only thing that's unfortunate for you is you're going to have to communicate this to all 70 partnerships, not just I think there's probably half dozen or a dozen on this call, but I think we're going to have to do this again, I'm afraid. But yeah, great session, not much else to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I think that I was just literally thinking the same thing. How do we scale up this conversation so that it's happening in all parts of the country? But I do think there's a huge opportunity at the moment, and whenever we have a catch up with Greg and the team at Southwest Food Hub, we tend to always be thinking about, okay, you know, what are the barriers at the moment that are currently preventing this from becoming a mainstream model, which to me feels like it's so obvious that it should. But I just wanted to sort of pose that question to you both. Like, what do you think are the main barriers at the moment that we need to overcome to move this from being, you know, something that's just happening at the moment in the Southwest to something which can really scale up? Tom, go for it.
I don't agree with Henry Dimbleby when he talks about we just need to get on with it. I do think there is a role for UK government on this and the devolved nation governments, even if it is just the case of endorsing, recommending, etc. You know, in the NFS, there was the recommendation of a food strategy, in a sustainable and integrated food strategy in every local authority area. Will it go into the white paper? We don't know, but it can't be just about a strategy. It should be about that collaborative partnership working, that cross-sector commitment to food system change at a local level. And I think the same thing needs to come out from the white paper around this agenda. It helps to shape, colour the way people think about this and to get people thinking about it, including the local enterprise partnerships. The other bit that was really clear for me is You know, I've sat here today and I feel so inexpert, it's embarrassing. This is quite a technical area. And I've absolutely, you know, one of the biggest issues for the local food partnerships I work for is that they don't have the expertise. They don't really understand all of the moving parts that are required in order to develop, you know, this dynamic food procurement. So I think there is a real knowledge and skills piece that needs to be filled. And I think the final one for me is capacity. You can't, and I think that's why you know, when Glenn presented the plan, you've got to have some resource, you've got to have some people who can make all this stuff happen. And it's interesting when you look at that map, and Patrick will remember these, you know, at Soil Association, we helped to run a number of the organic regional programs, regional offices. You had Southwest Food and Drink and others like that. And we've lost all of those because of the loss of the RDAs. But it was a recognition, actually, we need to reinvest in the infrastructure and the capacity to drive food system connection, collaboration, and everything else going forwards. So those are the three big ones for me.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to bring in Patrick because it looks like he's rejoined us, and hopefully it won't make you all motion sick watching his video. But Patrick, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really sorry about this if I'm competing with the train announcer, but I think I'd just like to pick up on what you said about barriers, Adele, and maybe Rob would add to that anyway. It seems to me that despite all the enthusiasm for relocalizing food systems, there are a couple of barriers which I've known about for many years, not least because when I was involved more full-time with farming, I was a carrot grower and used to supply carrots which were packed in the west of, well, Wales and then the west of England. All those packing facilities have closed. And also companies that used to locally process, many of that infrastructure has disappeared during my farming lifetime, which now does span 50 years. And what I think the barriers are to bringing it back include the absence of the enabling conditions, which obviously Henry Dimbleby could help unlock. But at the moment, if you introduce a relocalized food system, whether it's ourselves, we're making cheese, or we aspire to process meat on the farm, the costs of that are significant. And they're made worse by the attitude of the EHOs, who basically see germs as the primary threat to existence. But I feel like, I think somebody should remind the EHOs that if we win the battle with bacteria, we'll end up on the losing side, because in truth, bacteria are with us and always will be with us, and the pathological fear of bacteria, which informs all the NGOs, the EHOs that we work with, is really a big problem, and will continue to be in the way, I think, of relocalizing food systems. And the other thing is cost. That if the polluter doesn't pay, and the beneficial impacts of relocalized food systems are not somehow priced in a way which makes our products more affordable, it's going to continue to be very difficult to undercut these highly centralized processing and packing operations. And for good reason, because basically economies of scale are the truth, why we've centralized everything. That's why we haven't got any relocalized food systems left. So I think it's a fantastic time, but I think there are really significant barriers, and we need to be mindful of that. It's great that Vicky said earlier that, you know, the producer only gets 9% of the cost, which means that there should be some extra margin if you streamline the food chain. But I don't think it's as easy as that, because the production costs are higher in a mixed farming sustainable system, and then actually the processing costs are higher as well. And that's why all the abattoirs are disappearing. So we've got a huge barrier. We're campaigning on abattoirs, as I'm sure you all know. I'm not sort of pessimistic about it, but I just think we need to be realistic that the reason why so little local procurement is going on is because of these significant barriers. I better stop there before the announcer comes on again.
Thank you, Patrick. Never a dull moment working for Mr. Holden. Rob, I'd like to give you the last word, and then I think we need to wrap up before the end of the session, but over to you.
Thanks, Adele. Yeah, I'll keep it short. And just to reflect on Patrick's point, there are significant barriers, but we've seen through the Food for Life framework what can be delivered in spite of government policy and in spite of those barriers. £3 returned in local social economic value for every £1 spent, helping support local food businesses, relocalize those supply chains, create opportunities for local processors and producers. And those that cost equation being balanced partially through menu redesign, less and better meat, and by getting an increased number of customers buying into the service. So we know that it can be done, but all this is despite of government policy, not because of it. So we do need a joined up approach to procurement in the white paper, and dynamic food procurement should be at the centre of that.
Thank you very much, Rob. I think that's a really nice way to end the session. So, Greg, I'll hand back over to you. Thank you very much for having us on.
Thanks, Adele. Well done in difficult circumstances. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Rob. And thanks to Roman, Patrick. You did fantastically well. And thanks to all of our speakers and contributors today, and to our brilliant organisers, Ellen and Amy, in the background. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. You have listened intently, you have questioned intelligently, and we've covered a lot of ground. But now we need to act. As Henry Dimbleby said at the beginning of our session, our food system is broken, and public procurement can and should be a tool for change. So let's not wait for things to happen. Let's make things happen. And here on the screen in front of you is the contact details for DPUK. Shortly, we'll have the Q&A, the complete Q&A, and the opportunity for you to join and request a resource pack, join the mailing list, and start to create and, well, to continue to create and grow this network. And jointly, I'm sure we can make great things happen. And spread the word. That's the key thing. Spread the word, keep the efforts up, keep the passion, and make sure that we don't miss this golden opportunity to make some change. So finally, as I say, thanks for everybody who's brought this together. Thank you for your attention. We wish you a happy and healthy Christmas, and we will close this event in 5, 4,